Okay, I just wanted to give a little demo of something I've been working on. This game has really taken up a lot of my time lately, and I think I have to give it a break, but maybe someone can find this useful. I saw a few questions lately about FPS style movement, and also using emitters and sort of directional problems. But yeah, so I wanted to make an imp shooter, like an imp aim mechanic, and still have you able to walk around as a puppet, so there'd be an activation switch. Kind of like I enjoyed Resident Evil 4 on the Wii, and I always thought that was cool because it had like a sort of a clunky movement system, but you had the Wii control to aim, so you had like sort of fine control there. So that's what I set out to do, and I was mostly successful. I've got the normal puppet control here, and then I've got a key, the L bumper, that switches into imp aiming mode or gyro aiming mode, and you get a little reticle and you can aim at what you want. It also enables FPS style movement, so you can by default the left keys will strafe and the puppet will keep looking in the same direction, and you can look around with the right stick, and you're all the time you're still using the motion control, the imp, for aiming, and you can see he sort of moves around there, and you can have him do whatever you want. If I let go of the button, I go back to sort of third person style. You can see there's a few extra effects. If I hold over one of the red cubes, it's marked as an enemy. And you see the puppet raises her hand and sort of gets ready to fire. And then when I'm ready, I can fire off a few rounds. So there's also a little cannon I got up here, so you can see with the imp aiming you can control other objects as well. So I can have this fire at what I need to. So it's pretty handy, and I've seen some questions on how to do it, so this was pretty successful, and I find it works pretty flawlessly. There's a couple issues with it that I'll talk about at the end. I haven't really looked into how FPS is done now, so some of this might be like well-trod territory, or there might be better ways to do it, but this is what I came up with, so I thought I'd show you and you might find it useful. First of all, I'm going to sort of just talk about the FPS movement, like that's it, no imp aiming. So if you just care about that, you can just like watch this first part. The imp aiming stuff is kind of interesting. I'll show you how that worked, and then yeah, at the end I'll show you a couple tricks with emitters that I use to target the imp aiming spot, you know, no matter what. So I've got show invisibility off. I'm going to turn that on, but everything gets dark because we are actually in a skybox, and that's something we'll talk about at the end. But I can turn on studio lighting to be able to see a little better. And this is pretty much it. These two sculpts are to do with imp targeting, and this one is the camera, FPS movement, and also the imp targeting is the rest of it's in there. This would be pretty easy to stamp onto an existing puppet if you have it. If you see my controls here, there's not much. I just send out from the L button a signal to the imp aimer, and I also send out a signal to allow imp during possession while that's held down. That's on the imp page over here. I also have the force possession on, so the imp is forced into the puppet until I allow this, and then you can see the imp as well, even though the puppet is still possessed. So you can still, you know, take advantage of whatever that gives you, the fact that the puppet's possessed. That's pretty much it. Then I send an output to a single wireless transmitter that tells everything else that we're in aiming mode, and everything else works with that. So it's pretty simple to implement this. So first, FPS aiming. If you, or rather, it's pretty simple to implement this if you want to copy this puppet over to your own thing and just copy this the circuit board here. Okay, so for FPS aiming, we need a camera, first of all. The regular Imp camera won't do. And there's a tendency also for the Imp to always turn and follow in the direction he moves, or the puppet rather. The puppet's always going to turn in the direction he walks. So if we want strafing, we don't want him to turn in the direction he walks. And that's not too easy to do, or obvious how that's done. So basically what we're going to do, our tools are, we can look at the puppet tweak menu, and you see he's got a turn speed. We could turn this all the way down, and that would prevent the puppet from moving, or from turning, but it would prevent him from turning ever. And we do want to be able to eventually turn the puppet. So the trick is in a tab here called Behavior. You can have an option called Turn Towards and give a tag for the puppet to look at. And that's basically how we enable the strafing, by having it turn towards a tag. So we need a tag that sits right in front of the puppet that he's always going to look at, that we can rotate around the puppet as we want. So we're going to have this block, which is going to contain the camera and that tag. And that's pretty much it. So the Imp targeting is in here too, but just ignore that. You can look up here. This is all that it takes to make the FPS stuff. So the most important thing, first of all, is the Imp tag. I call it look here, and it's just in front of the box. So you put a tag in your box and move the tag out in front of it, and that's it, you're done. Mine's not perfectly in front of the box because when I got the over-the-shoulder thing, I kind of want him looking a little to the right, so I put it a little bit to the right, so that's where the puppet's always going to look, but it doesn't really matter. For most FPS, you know, if you got a camera in the guy's head, you'd probably want it to look straight forward. So that's it. That's the tag. That's kind of the most important thing. Now we need the box to stay with the player, and that's we use a teleporter for. So we first set a tag in the player's microchip. Let's just scope in there and take a look at his microchip. I put everything in the controller. So I put a player tag here, and you see its values here are, let's reset the timeline. The values are X pointing this way, Y pointing up, and Z pointing into us. I match that up with the tags on the look. Tags on the look here are backwards, but I guess that doesn't matter where it's looking. I could just as easily. Let's not do anything there. I guess it doesn't matter, but what is important is the teleporter tags. These need to match the player tag because this thing is going to teleport to the player, and you kind of want the front of it to be sticking out the front of the player. Now there's a couple tweaks in the teleporter thing that are important. Do you want it to align to the space or the orientation? Now ordinarily for the first person thing, I've got mine wired to the key, so I have it matching both most of the time, but you could actually turn this off so it doesn't match the orientation, and you can see the effect that has. I go into gameplay. I don't really need to do anything. Sorry, test. And I'll walk around a little bit. You can see that the block teleports exactly to where that player is, but it doesn't turn. Now he's not looking at it right now because I don't have the button pressed, but he would then be forced to look at the block if I had that button pressed. And there's no way I can really turn. I guess I still can. Oops. Right, I was in. So that's it. You've got a player tag. That's where this box is going to teleport to. If I start time, you see the box teleports right to his middle there. And you don't want it, in general, you don't want it to match the target orientation. You're going to control that yourself. So you have it pointing one direction, and when we want the target to turn, will rotate that box. So you don't match the target orientation, or it will turn with the puppet, of course. So we want it just to teleport to him and stick exactly on him without turning, and the teleporter does that perfectly. That's exactly what it should do. In my case, I've got the button, so I usually want it to follow its orientation as well. That way when you press the button, it is pointing the direction the player is when he presses the button, and then I just turn off that aspect of it. So it's still following the player, but it's no longer matching his position. So that's it. That will create the player strafing around looking in one direction, and that's it. I should add that the camera is also an important part of this FPS block. This really goes up in here too. If you're creating a FPS movement thing, you're going to have a camera, and the camera is going to be relative to the box. So my camera is over here, sort of behind the box, so that when it teleports to him, that's the over-the-shoulder position that I'm looking at. If you're doing like a true FPS shooter and you want the camera coming out of his head, then the teleport location for the box is going to have to be on his head, and that's where the camera goes. Because now when we add our rotators, and also if you want to set the position of the camera, first press play so that the box sticks to where it's going to be. It might be his head or it might be here. And then adjust the camera from here. That way it's where it's going to be when the box is teleported to the player. You adjust the camera by left clicking into it, or sorry, left bumper and X, and you can move the camera exactly where you want it. And then exit out. So that sets the box up with the guy. The tag's looking forward, and because of this tweak menu item, where the puppet is looking at that tag, he will always look at that tag. And because the teleporter in general is going to have this match orientation off, he's never going to be able to stop looking at that tag. As long as these things are powered, you can depower the look here button, and this puppet will stop looking at it, which is nice. So to get it to look left and right and up and down, I just rotate the block, and that has the effect of rotating the camera as well. So the camera is going to rotate around, and the field of view is going to rotate around, and the direction the player is facing, the pointer in front of him, is going to rotate around. Keep in mind that the camera is going to rotate like relative to this block. So when I look up with this block, the camera is actually going to follow a circle around the back of the player back here, which is kind of what I want from this point of view. But again, if you want as you see, if I play it, the camera is going to be there. Oops. And the block is here, and the block's going to rotate, so the camera's going to rotate sort of around the back. So yeah, again, for a true first-person shooter, this block would probably have to be on the character's head. So you change this tag location, and then the camera would be right on the block. That way, as you're turning up and down, the camera is turning from that location. You might even want the camera a tad higher, like so it's on his eyes. So when you rotate, the camera goes back a little bit into the scene. But that's for something else. For me, I have the camera a ways away from the block, so it's actually going to rotate. It's not going to be the camera rotating. It's going to rotate around a nice arc, which is kind of what I want. If you can see in play mode, when I look up, I can see the bottom of my character, which is kind of cool. And okay, so that's it for the camera. Now, how do we actually rotate the block? I just use a controller sensor. I just stamp a controller sensor directly into here. I set it to remote control for player 1. This is all kind of single player stuff. You could have multiple players. Each one would need their own block, and you'd have each one responding, the tag for the player would be different. It would teleport to a different location, and it would have a different look at me tag, one for each player. But I've got it remote controlled for player 1, so that's fine. And I'm going to take the right local stick output. You have to use right local. Don't use right scene, or it's just kind of confusing, because wherever the camera is positioned will change how much the X and the Y are affected. So just use right stick local, and you can send that to a splitter. Split it into the X and the Y. They each go to a rotator. The X rotates the splitter around that way, and the Y rotates the splitter around this way. And you can look up and down. By default, the wire that comes out of here attaches to this as a modulate, the little X there. You can change that by left bumpering and pressing the button, but we want modulate. That way whatever the value is set in here gets multiplied by the right stick value. So the maximum would be 180 when it's outputting 1, and the minimum would be 0, and it'll go up and down between those speeds as you press the stick. So that works out perfectly. And that's pretty much it. That will rotate the blocks. There's one other thing to watch out for. You want the X rotator to be off. You want it to be scene space. So this local space button is off. The Y rotator, you want it to be local space. That's because if they're both local space, as soon as you rotate Y, if you go to rotate X, you're actually on a, you're rotating it along a different axis now because you've changed the coordinate space when you rotated it. So always have X rotate in scene space, so it's always just going left and right, and then Y is going to be local to wherever you're looking at that time. So that's the right configuration. X should be scene space, so have that off, and Y is local space. You can also play around with the strength to give it a different feel, but generally very high or 100 seems to get pretty good results. So this is all you need for the FPS movement block. You'd have this stuff. I'm powering all this on, but if all this was unpowered, I would just be in FPS movement mode all the time, and I wouldn't have to hold a button down. So you need a camera that you position. First of all, you need a teleporter and a tag to move the block to the player. And generally, you're going to have, like when I'm playing, this thing. If I hold L, well, you can't see it in here, but that'll be turned off when I'm playing. So you want the teleporter with the axis turned off whenever you want the first person mode, or the orientation. So that way it'll just stick on his body and not move. We're going to use our own rotators to move it. Then you need a tag on the box, which is going to be in front of that box. That's where the player is going to look. You set the sculpture to look at that. You need a tag on the player that's going to go to the teleporter. And that's pretty much it. Then you set up once it's teleported in place, you can pause and adjust the camera to where you want it. Once that's done, you can put in the controllers and the rotators to rotate the thing. That's pretty much how you do the FPS movement. So when I'm playing it and I have this controlled, there's a box on my body now with a tag in front of me. That's where the puppet's always looking. Even if I move left, the box is moving, but it's not orienting. And the puppet's probably still in the background trying to turn to where I'm walking, but it's not letting it. Then when I press L and R, I'm rotating that box manual, and I'm rotating it up and down. I never put any constraints on the rotation, so you can rotate until it's backwards, but you can fix that whenever you want. So just stop it up here somehow. But that's the basic idea. I hold the L1 bumper, and I get this sort of first-person shooter mode. This is an over-the-shoulder look, but same idea. Okay, if you're interested, I'll go into the Imp. How the imp targeting is done, which is has some cool tricks, and then after that I'll look at how you use the imp targeting and how some tricks with emitters to get them to fire how you want. So for imp targeting, we need the imp position, and for that we need a controller sensor. This is the first step in the imp targeting. It's a ring, and it's necessarily a ring. If I look in here, all I've done is I've got a controller, which is again set to remote for player 1. Each player is going to have their own imp. And if I look on the last page, I have something called imp hover position. So I output that to a follower, and the only purpose of this follower is to put a tag at the imp hover position. I also have this thing look at the camera. I look at the camera that we set up in this block. So it's got a camera tag in there, I'll show you. He looks at that camera to make sure the hole is in the middle and the imp never goes outside the side of this sculpture. That's because it follows everything relentlessly. So that gives us the location of the imp, and this thing moves itself to the imp as fast as it possibly can. All of my followers are set to the max speed, which is apparently 787.494, but it tries to do its best. Note that there's no tag in this follower. In order to get the follower location, I just input the output from the imp hover position directly into the target position. So it's a tagless follower. I'm just telling it exactly where I want it to go. and that works really good, and it's a super handy thing to be able to do. The lookout rotator is, yeah, just pointing it at the thing. So if I press play, you can see, actually I'll close this for a sec, that this thing is following the imp. And you'd think that's almost good enough that you have this target. But the problem is that the imp hovers over everything relentlessly. It does not care if you have it invisible or collidable, or even if you've set this option, ignore imp, behavior. Nothing really works to stop the imp from hovering over anything. And that doesn't really work for what I wanted, because the player was going to be in the scene and I couldn't have the imp all of a sudden hovering over the player. I wanted to see where it hits in the scene. And so just a note on this thing being a ring, this has to be a ring because, again, the imp hovers over everything. So if the imp actually hovers over its own sculpture that I have here, that sculpture will try and move to the imp, and then the imp will move away from it, and it'll move to the imp hovers over it, and you get this terrifying effect of the thing coming towards you. Even if you've got like the tweak or the microchip open, and I put that in the middle, and I press play, it just, oh, he's for some reason not coming towards me now. But anyway, if you usually any sort of problems with that imp, if you hover over anything, or now I can't get it's acting, doesn't act properly. So you need that thing to be a ring so the imp can go through it and not touch the outsides, if that makes any sense. Otherwise the imp will hover over even this. Doesn't matter if it's invisible or whatever. It always hovers over everything. Even some things you can't see, it seems to hover over. So all I want is its position as a tag. That's what I've got now. And I'm going to use that position now in conjunction with the first-person camera to fire off a laser pointer. That's what I'm really going to use. Here's the camera tag, and it's in this. It's kind of important that all these things line up. So this ring looks at the camera. The camera is over here, and I'll bring up its menu. And if I look at the laser sight menu, it's really important that that tag is exactly where the camera is. So here's what we do. We use the laser sight to target that tag that we put in the middle of the imp ring. And the nice thing about a laser sight, see it's looking for that imp tag, is we can decide what it hits and what it passes through. So in this case, all I've done is say, don't detect friends. And I'm going to label everything I don't want to be able to target, like myself, or ammunition, like missiles that you fired, other things like effects, or anything that you don't want to have all of a sudden the crosshair go over, you mark it as a friend at the sculpture. And I have it detecting everything though, because you do want to detect as much as possible if you want to detect it. Otherwise, if the imp ever goes off into space, like if you point at the sky, you'll lose. It just fails. The output's 0. So that's the trick. This laser pointer is going to point at the imp tag, but it's only going to hit things that I want it to. So it's not going to hit my friends. And this thing outputs the target hit position, and I send that hit position to a wireless transmitter. That's pretty much it. So this hoop gives us a tag of where the imp is hovering over, but I can't really use that because the imp hovers over weird stuff. So I fire a laser pointer from the camera through that tag, and then I see what it hits, and I can customize it so it only hits what I want it to hit. And that's it. That's pretty much it. And I broadcast the hit location for anyone who wants to use it. So who wants to use it is the reticle, the thing I'm actually going to aim at. That's the first thing that wants to use it, so it can show me where I'm aiming. If I look at this target, I've got first the wireless receiver that takes the imp hit location. So it's either going to be broadcasting and I'll get the position, or if the imp is off the screen, it'll be 0, so it'll turn off. Or if if I'm not holding down the button and not powering the transmitter, this is also 0, of course. So this sort of turns everything on. I've got a text displayer that I use as the reticle. That's just the best way to do it. I used a sculpture originally that was placed a little bit in front, and it has some benefits, but this thing is just so much better because you can set it to just see through everything, and you can set it to always face the camera. You don't need to worry about facing the camera and all that. So that's what we're actually going to see on the screen. And all we want to do is send this follower to the location that was hit by the laser pointer. And that's it. Then this guy, this reticle shows up there. This is in the very center of that block, and the follower is also in the very center of the block. If something isn't working, or your scene isn't working, check the locations of all your tags. Your tags have to be in the right spots. If your aim is off or something, it's probably because this guy's following to the wrong place, or someone's tag got moved. Like if you change the shape of something, you always have to recheck where all the tags are. So again, I'm using a tagless follower. This guy just accepts that signal from the transmitter, the hit location, and I just tell it directly on the third page, this is the target position, go to it. There's no tag in here at all. And again, I have this maxed out, so it tries to go there as quickly as possible. I'd like to use a teleporter for these things, but a teleporter seems to only take a tag. So one way or another, you need to get a tag there anyway to use a teleporter. And the only way I know how to get a tag there is by moving it there with a follower. So that's it. That puts the reticle where it needs to be, just based on where that laser pointer is hitting. And that's kind of it for how that works. So you start with the ring, which sole purpose is to get a tag. Whoops, don't want to do that. To get a tag where the imp is hovering over. And I do that by getting the hover position from the controller and moving it there, and then showing the tag. And then I use the camera. Wherever the camera is in the scene, I fire a laser pointer aimed at that tag off of that, and that allows me to control what I hit with that laser pointer. So you can see when I play, I can move through the body. The hit thing just goes through the body. You still see it because it's always visible in the scene, but it doesn't it doesn't cause a problem. I can shoot all the way through there. There is a little bumpiness in there, and I think that's just how the imp wants to get to a reasonable location with the camera, because I have the imp pushed as far back as possible. But in gameplay, if you're shooting through, you really don't see it at all. It's pretty workable. And that's it. Now I've got another little thing here down at the bottom. This is just the same laser pointer. I've done the same thing. I've got it coming from the same location. Very important. It always comes from the camera. And this one, though, I have searching only for things that I've marked as foe. So this way I can output a signal if I'm targeting an enemy. And you can do whatever else. You can change all these however you want. But if I see a foe, I output the foe location on a wireless transmitter. So I'm outputting two signals: the hit location for anything, for the reticle and whatever, and a foe location, which you can use to which I use to raise the puppet's hand when he looks at the thing. There's one other little thing. I've just stuck a global settings gadget in here, and this is just to get rid of the annoying imp popping out of the person animation, or whatever that is, effect. And I have allow imps turned off in the scene, so there should be no imps in the scene. But I re-enable it after 0.1 seconds after I press the button. So I press the activate button, and I give it 0.1 seconds where you're not going to see any imps and you're not going to interact with them. Then I turn this on, and that seems to hide the imp animation popping out of the guy and going back in. So as soon as this is turned off, the timer has to be complete and the button has to be down. So as soon as he lifts up the button, this thing goes back to no imps, and you don't see the imp fly back into the puppet. So that was just my workaround for that, if that helps. So just to show you how the faux location might work, we could change the reticle. If, say, I wanted to turn it red, I could copy this wireless receiver, but this time I want to say, am I hitting a foe? So that means that second laser pointer hits something, and I can just say, well, if I hit a foe, I don't know, we'll turn this thing red, maybe. Does that look red? Alright, well, something like that. Okay, and stop recording, and just wire that from there to here. So that keyframe will activate if I'm over a foe, and so I can bring this up, and there, when I go over that guy, the target turns red. So you can see if you're got something to shoot, or you can see if it's a headshot or something like that. See that, but that's just an output that you can use however you want. And finally, I'll show you, pretty much covers it for the Imp Aim, how it actually works, the mechanics. And I'll show you a little bit about just a couple things I did with the emitters. First of all, our little cannon emitter up here, if you forget what this guy did, he just, if I'm facing here, I can use that cannon, and he follows my imp pointer as well. He's shoot even towards me with it, if I'm aiming on the ground here, and he'll shoot away. He shoots anywhere that imp is pointing, which is nice. So to get that, I just, it's a fairly simple microchip. Again, I just paste a controller in. I mean, maybe there's better ways to do this, but I just paste a remote control from player 1 and use that to fire off the shot. And to aim it, again, I'm receiving the hit location, and I just pump that into a look-at rotator. So again, tagless look-at rotator has the same option here, target position, which is wonderful. I don't have to give it a tag. I know the position. I could, I did stick a tag in the reticle. There is a tag here, imp aim target location, that you could use. So I could aim it at a tag, but I don't know. It's kind of fun to just directly input the wire and don't have to worry if that tag's in the right spot, or I don't know. So that looks at the thing, and because the emitter is simply, I guess I got to bring up the tweak. The emitter is firing out the front of this. As this thing rotates, whoops, of course, the emitter will rotate as well, and so it'll fire the right direction there. There's one other way you can, a fun thing I found about emitters. That's pretty much it for that. You rotate the thing so it's pointing at the hit location here, and then the emitter can fire out. I just got this thing firing out circle, and it shoots the ball. One other thing, I'll show you how the puppet does her emitting from the arms, and this is I've never worked with puppets before, so this is almost certainly the wrong way to do this, but you're probably not supposed to just stamp 3 microchips down its arm, but that's what I chose to do. So the first microchip is, again, just gets a hit location and looks at something. So I wanted her to raise her arm up. I've got if I pointed the look at direction straight down her arm, she'd point right at the location, but I didn't want her to point right at it. I wanted her to have some bend in her elbow. So I actually have her, looking at the target with this part of her arm. It's not straight down her arm. I just wanted her to look at the target like that. So that's just cosmetic. I'm not doing anything with that. That's just basically an animation. I'm using the location to guide the animation to look at the thing. And that's really helpful if you do have animations that you want to power by it. You just take this receiver, again, plug it straight into the target location thing. Don't worry about tags. I think that's just kind of cleaner. Power it up, and it will look wherever it's pointing. And again, you don't have to have it look at the tag or look at the hit location directly. You can tweak where you want the front of the arm to be. So the front's down here, so only that part's going to point at it. Same thing for the forearm. Exactly the same thing, except in this case I have the forearm pointing straight down because I want that aimed directly at the target. Same thing though, I just got the wire going in there into its target location box. The hand is a little more interesting. I've got it, this is the hit location, powers the look at rotator, so the hand is going to, actually, the hand doesn't move yet. This is the hit location. The hand only really moves if I use this one. This is how I emitted the balls without pointing the sculpture. I didn't really want to have to worry about the balls coming out of the palm of her hand or the fingertips or whatever. I just wanted the balls to come out of her hand and aim at the thing. So I didn't want to have to rotate the sculpture in the exact right place to get it out. Here's how you do that. This is, I think, kind of a cool trick. Here's the hit location, the XYZ of the location coming from my laser scope back in the camera block. And I send that to a look at rotator because I have the ability to give it a target position. The emitter does not have that ability, so you give this guy the target position. This is actually a dead rotator. its speed is 0, its strength is 0, it's never going to rotate anything. I'm using it simply to input a target position and get out a scene space direction. This is, I think there's a wire from here, yeah. So I'm getting out the scene space direction, yeah, there it is, and pumping that into the emitter. So I can give this thing an XYZ, the lookout rotator, and it'll give me a direction to that XYZ. I can then take that direction and pass it into scene space direction for the emitter. So this lookout rotator does nothing as far as rotation goes. I'm using it practically as a calculator. The hit location comes in, gives us a direction to that location. We send the direction out to the emitter. So this doesn't involve any animation as far as firing the balls go. So when this is when the character is just looking like this. The hand hasn't been rotated or anything yet, but the balls still fire directly at the target because I tell them absolutely the direction I want them to go. I'm not relying on the sculpture to be positioned properly. This one is the faux location. So if I see a faux, and if you see here, like even this emitter, if I open its thing, I mean it's shooting up into his arm, but that never gets used because I've specified the direction explicitly. Okay, but if he does see a faux, he's going to power one more emitter, and that's one more rotator, and that one's just going to rotate the palm of the hand. I wanted the palm of the hand to point at the target, so I have that as the front. That's the thing I want to look at it. And that's it. Again, I'm not using a tag. I just say point, here's the location, point at it, and the hand will then point at it. So you can use that pretty much any ways you want. You just stick these receivers on anything in your scene that you want, and yeah, you'll get the location, and with that location you can pass it through a look-at rotator to get the direction, which is kind of cool. So if you have the location here, you can get the direction to that location from here. That's pretty much it. There are a couple sort of limitations. One is that you can't, it has to hit something. You can't shoot it into the sky. So if I'm shooting into the sky here, that's why this is actually all a skybox. There's a sculpture up there that's invisible. And you know that because there's the imp. If I could possibly avoid it, I would never show the imp. But it turns, I mean, as far as I can tell, anytime you try and turn off the visible imp, the functionality of the gyro goes with it. So that's a shame. You can't ever turn off that imp. There's the dot way in the distance, but the imp is still there, which is a shame. That's the camera trying to get back to his puppet thing. And that's one limitation. Yeah, I don't like seeing the imp. That's kind of my main thing. And I was thinking and also the necessity to have a skybox. You know, if I'm in edit mode, this actually looks like that. It's kind of troublesome because it makes you have to put a skybox over everything, but you know, for indoor things or not, things that aren't outside, doesn't matter. And if you do want to shoot into the sky, you can always put a box there, but then you see the imp. So I was thinking maybe if there's no signal, to just switch to like a center-based aiming for the time and just ignore the gyro, but I don't know what. Yeah, whatever. I might look into that. There's one other tweak that was kind of interesting. If anyone cares, you could turn around. Note that this is kind of like it targets wherever the character's facing. So if I turn around, the camera whips around, which is kind of cool. If you want to do quick turns, you could turn your character around and then turn the camera. But you could also try and get the location that the camera is looking at. I experimented with this a little bit. I'll just show it for fun. If I look in this box, I tried to do a system where I would get a signal from the camera. If you look at the possessed puppet camera, This is probably how actual first-person shooters are done that target the center of the screen. I don't know, but I imagine you'd need to get the position of this camera. So you can take the camera transform, which has all the information about the camera, and I just plugged it into a splitter where I can get the position of the camera, and I have this look at rotator just constantly trying to look at that position. But as soon as I get a signal from here, I turn it off. I say I want the not signal here to turn off the rotator, and I think it's handy to have a gyroscope there too. And in that case, I wouldn't want this to ever match the orientation. I just have it flat, because this thing is going to be doing the rotating to look at, hopefully, where the camera is. Actually, it's not looking where the camera is. I have it, it's going to be looking where the camera is, but I actually want it to look where the camera is looking. So what I did was I just make the look at rotator point backwards. That way the backwards part is looking at the camera. That way the frontwards part is where it should be, where the camera is looking. And that sort of works. It's not great, but if I'm looking, character's pointed this way, and I turn the camera around, I can press the button, and actually the camera stays roughly where it is. If I turn, what am I doing here? Character's walking here. If I turn the camera on, the camera sort of stays, and the character turns around to match that. So depends on your control scheme. If you're looking around this way and you say, oh, I want to find out what's there, your character turns around and shoots. And here your character turns around and shoots. I think I kind of prefer it the other way with the puppet turning around, but you can do it either way. Anyway, that's about covers everything. I hope you found that somewhat useful in any way. Let me know if there's anything that doesn't make sense, or if there's way better ways of doing things. I never really looked up how to do this, like online or anything, so maybe there's way better ways, but I thought I found a few kind of interesting things, and I found a few pitfalls that maybe you can avoid too. This thing's called over shoulder imp aim. It's public and everything, so you can just go get it, and my name's Muzzclaw, and you can find it there. Also check out my missile command game if you go there too. That's where I kind of first learned all this imp stuff, and I think it's really, really fun. Okay, thanks for watching. Happy dreaming. This amazing game, by the way. I have to take a break though, because I could not sleep. I could go all night without sleeping.